Hello, this is Rachel from 7 and All, and in today's video I am going to be kind of comparing and contrasting Gentle and Classical Preschool with Gentle and Classical Primer and talking about which one you ought to choose to fit your family's needs the best. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you probably know that I am a pretty dedicated fan of Gentle and Classical. I've used a lot of their resources over the years. I'm currently getting close to the end of using Gentle and Classical Preschool for the second round with my second son. We've really loved and enjoyed these resources, and one of the very common questions I hear from a lot of people that are thinking about choosing Gentle and Classical is, which program should I start with? Should I start with the preschool or should I start with the primer for my child? And maybe you'll give some details. You know, maybe my child does know the alphabet, my child can count to 10 or can count to 20. Should I start with preschool or should I start with primer? So I'm going to be talking about all the factors I think you should consider in this video, as well as just kind of giving you some big picture comparisons of the two programs as well. Now, do remember, you can download the preschool teacher's guide as well as the primer teacher's guide completely for free on the Gentle and Classical website. I'm going to link to their website down below. I am an affiliate of Gentle and Classical, and I really appreciate it when you use my links and support my family in that way. So let's get started with the comparison. First of all, I do want to say that while a lot of people want to place their child correctly based on their alphabet and number skills, it should be noted that neither Gentle and Classical Preschool nor the Primer program are primarily focused on ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. They are primarily literature, art, music, Bible. They're primarily really the riches of education, what we could call the riches or the humanities of education, which I think are incredibly, incredibly important. Education is not just about those ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, although those do play a factor. And I do want to say that the preschool program does have a stronger integration of the alphabet and early math skills, preschool level math skills. This one is a little bit stronger, a little bit more focused on being at a certain level of ABC and 1, 2, 3 skills, but it's not completely focused, and I hope that you'll get to see that as I go through this video. So more than just alphabet skills and number skills that your child has, I would also be thinking about, when thinking about how to place a child in preschool or primer, I would be thinking about what is their attention span? Can they sit through, can they sit through a story at all? Can they sit through a short story? Can they sit through a long story? What's their attention span like? What is their comprehension level like? Are they at a level where they can comprehend a longer story or a more complex story or a story with moral values included? So that's one big consideration that I would have. Another one is, what are your child's verbal skills like? Are they just really emerging verbally, or can they really carry a conversation? Can they tell a story to you? Can they sing a song along with you? See what their verbal skills are like is another thing that I would consider, as well as how well can they comprehend and how well can they engage in dialogue with you. When you're going over a memory statement or when you're going over a story, can they have a dialogue? Can you ask them questions and they can actually respond and make sense and kind of engage with the story verbally or engage with a discussion topic verbally? Those are the kind of skills that I would also look at. And those skills aren't necessarily tied to a particular age. So there will be 4-year-olds who have a great attention span, who are very, very verbal and who can engage very well with the primer level stories. So it's not going to be just tied to a particular age, but I would tie it to a skill level. Another thing to consider, a lot of people, are like me. You have a couple of kids close together. And some people will, if you have a few kids close together in age, you're looking for one program and you want to be able to combine your children for learning these great humanities and riches subjects. So my personal advice, which not everyone will agree with and it won't fit every situation, but my personal leaning would be to skew toward your older or your more advanced child in choosing the program. not to skew toward the younger or less advanced child. And I am an oldest child. I was always an advanced learner, so that probably skews my own perspective a little bit on this. But I definitely have a soft spot for the oldest children. And I do think from an educational perspective, it just makes sense. Your older child at this preschool primer level is the one more in need of education. It doesn't so much need, it's not so much that you need to focus on your younger child necessarily. Your situation might be a little bit different, but I would lean towards focusing on what the older child's abilities are for a few reasons. Like I said, the younger child probably doesn't really need so much formal schooling right now. And for another thing, if you skew younger and you're using preschool and trying to bring your older child into preschool, you can sometimes end up with the dynamic that your older child, who already knows a lot of this info that you're trying to talk about with the memory cards, or already knows these concepts or picks them up really quickly, they might kind of take over. And they might kind of take over and take away from what you're really aiming for your younger child to learn. So that's just my own perspective, is that if you're trying to combine a couple kids, I'd rather skew toward the older one and have your little child as more of a tag along. They will pick up a lot, even if the schoolwork itself or the stories themselves are a little too challenging. They're still going to pick up and learn a lot, but it's going to meet the needs of your older child better. Now, to what extent are numbers and letters incorporated in the programs? Those are mainly incorporated through, in the preschool program, you're going through Preschool Math at Home by Kate Snow. Fabulous book, fabulous resource. I love this for our first math resource. And you also are using the preschool morning binder, which these have been heavily used in my home. You're building a letter as you're learning about that letter of the week. You get to find the letter, trace the letter. They also have some color pages when you're learning colors. They've got shapes, basic two-dimensional shapes, and then you have number pages as well, and a variety of number pages, some of which are connected to activities from Preschool Math at Home. So I would also say, if your child has mastered all of the material at the Preschool Math at Home level, and if they have mastered the alphabet, I would lean away from preschool, or maybe I might incorporate preschool, but use the kindergarten morning binder and use some other math and phonics curriculum to better meet their needs, would be another option as well. I'll show you the kindergarten binder. This is what is designed to accompany primer. So you can see some slight differences in how they do it. You're now doing uppercase and lowercase letters. And then instead of just circling a letter, you're seeing a letter in the context of a CVC word. So they're supposed to circle the word that has that letter. And this was great because when we first started using this binder, my son was just beginning to sound out words. So it provided a very small, short amount of reading practice every day when we could, choose a couple words on this page to read and to sound out. So I like how this levels up, gives a little bit more challenge. Then for this one, you're writing numbers and counting numbers up to 20. You have some different kinds of shapes pages. You get some addition pages and other variety of math-related pages, as well as 3D shapes. There are also math memory statements that are incorporated in Primer as well, that kind of roughly align with Kindergarten Math at Home by Kate Snow, although you don't have to be using that program to use Primer. So that is the level to which alphabet and numbers are incorporated in Gentle Classical Preschool and Primer. They also, like for preschool, your stories are typically connected to a letter of the week. So for T, we have the tiny seed. They'll give you ideas in the handicraft guide about, build the letter with Play-Doh, build it with blocks, draw it in a sand tray. So they definitely are aimed at a stage when your child is learning, getting really comfortable with letters, beginning to master letters and their sounds. So that is definitely something to keep in mind as you're choosing between these programs, but it's far from the whole or the major focus of the program. So I'm going to talk about some of the other level-based differences between preschool and primer. So for preschool, all of the literature is picture books. You have a specific core picture book of the week, and these can be in a variety of challenges, although they are typically fairly simple picture books. So, for example, the one we're doing this week in my home is The Very Hungry Caterpillar for the letter V. This is a fantastic book, lots of learning points, lots of little learning connections you can make, but it is a very, very simple, quick story. It doesn't even take 5 minutes to read. But other books of the week might be a little bit longer or more complex. I also very much love this book, Sleep Tight Farm, but there's lots of learning points and discussions you can have, but you can tell it's definitely a wordier story than something like The Very Hungry Caterpillar. It's a little bit wordier, a little bit longer, so if you have a very young preschooler, this one might be a little bit one of the more challenging ones in preschool. By contrast, for primer, you are using mostly classic tales. You might be classic fairy tales, classic folk tales, very, very iconic tales that are pretty familiar, Beatrix Potter, very well-known stories for the most part. They are not really on this very short picture book level anymore at all, and you do see a progression of length and complexity kind of gradually as you go through primer. So each week you will have one core story that you're focusing on. So for week 1, it's The Three Little Pigs. Week 2, it's The Little Red Hen. So those are fairly familiar. We know those are simple, not over the top long. They're not very complex stories. But then by the end of the year, you are reading through, and you're given a few options, but you're reading through a child's version of Pilgrim's Progress, which is, and you don't read through the whole thing in a week. It's scheduled over several units. But this is definitely a more complex story to understand and engage with, a longer story to understand and engage with. But your child has time to kind of grow up with the stories from Unit 1 through Unit 36 of primer. As far as how you engage with those stories, preschool includes a whole handicraft guide, and you're typically doing some kind of simple, age-appropriate handicraft that goes with each story. So for this week, we are getting to make little fruit skewers with different kinds of fruits, so that we can talk about colors, we can make patterns, we can count how many different fruits of different kinds we get on our skewers, and it kind of connects with this whole hungry caterpillar story. It's a fun one, but you have a little handicraft scheduled for each story. For the primer level, you can definitely feel free to add any handicrafts. There aren't specifically handicrafts connected to the story scheduled in primer, although for a lot of these, because they are such well-known fairy tales and folk tales, it would probably be pretty easy to come up with adding some of those. But for primer, the main way that we're really encouraged to engage with the story is through developing the foundational skills of narration, through retelling stories, acting out stories. And the tools that come with primer are storyboards. So you have backgrounds, you have little characters that you can act them out. Now, you don't have to use the storyboards. I did not use the storyboards, but I did really want to work on practicing the narration and retelling. So what we did is we would just act out the story with toys. We would act it out with ourselves, pretending to be Goldilocks, pretending to be Mama Bear and Papa Bear. We would act out and retell the stories. So you're focusing on one story for the week, but you can read it once, you can read it twice, you can act it out once or twice. You're getting to know the story very well to a point where your child ideally can be telling much of the story on their own or acting it out, showing what happened in the story. So you can tell that level of engagement with the story is definitely going to require more verbal development and more comprehension than the preschool level, where hey, we're just reading the story, we're doing some crafts, it's a little bit more low stakes. You can definitely be asking questions, talking, discussing the story, but they don't need to be at that level yet where they can be acting out the characters in the story and kind of showing what happened. Both programs incorporate some classical music study. Now, for preschool, it's a very, very simple. Throughout the entire year, you are learning the Peter and the Wolf composition, the story of Peter and the Wolf, in which every instrument in the orchestra is representing a different character. There are ballets that have been performed to this show that you can watch. There are picture books that you can read and listen to the music. The program also includes a storyboard and characters that you can get out and act out these characters, but it's just this one show throughout the whole year that you can kind of just gradually build familiarity with, My boys have really enjoyed Peter and the Wolf. They know it very, very well by now. We've watched the ballet, we've acted it out. We've done a lot with that, but it's just the one. So that is very simple and not overwhelming for the younger child. Then in primer, the expectations do go up a little bit when it comes to engagement with classical music. You cover 3 composers over the course of a year, and they give you ideas for picture book biographies to use, or picture books that are tied to their opera or their ballets that they wrote. So with 3 composers, you're learning about each one for roughly 12 weeks if you're spending a week per unit. So you're still getting 3 months to go over one composer's works. That's a pretty good chunk of time. You're not rushing by any means. But in addition, part of the music education is learning to identify different instruments of the orchestra. So you're learning to name the organ and the piano and the tuba and all these different instruments and kind of categorize them. You're given 3-part cards that you can play games with and do different categorizations with as you're learning about the instruments. We had a lot of fun with that when we did primer for the first time. And I learned a lot because classical music is not one of my strong suits. But even though I learned a lot, I would not say it's super hard. There's a lot of opportunities for just repetition and repetition, which is so important with teaching young children. Then when it comes to Bible for preschool, you're just instructed in the grid to read a Bible story basically every day as you're doing your morning time, and that's probably something pretty normally that most of us do. We have our little children's Bible, whatever one we prefer to use, whatever one fits our kids and our family, and just read a story every day. You're just building familiarity and exposure, getting to know these great stories from Scripture. Then, it also includes catechism songs that you're learning over several weeks for each catechism song. Then in primer, things change a little bit. And this is one thing I actually really like about primer, is that you just focus on one core Bible story each week. They do recommend a specific storybook Bible, but you can use, of course, any storybook Bible that you prefer or that you already own, or you can just read the story from the Bible. But maybe it's the story of Adam and Eve, or maybe it's a story of David being anointed to be king. Whatever story that you're focusing on, you can read that. You can read it again during the week, and you can also do some of the acting out of the story. My sons really, really enjoyed acting out Bible stories when we were doing that last year. You can have them retell the story. It's kind of the same idea with your one fairy tale, your one wonder tale of the week, is that you're getting really, really familiar with this one story. You're building the skills of familiarity. So it's not just an exposure to every Bible story, but a growing very familiar with this story. There are also catechism memory statements, questions and answers to memorize, and those are tied into lessons from this book, Theology. And you don't move through this whole book in 1 year. A lot of times you spend several units on just one short lesson, which gives you the chance to discuss again, hey, what's the significance of this catechism statement? What's the significance of God creating the world? What's the significance of Adam's and Eve's choice to sin? How does that affect everything else? So you can have it, you definitely have a lot of time to have discussions and really, really focus in on these ideas, because it does not move quickly. It's not trying to cover everything your child needs to know about the Bible, but to kind of just move slowly and get these core stories that are key to the story of redemption, and get these core ideas of creation and fall and God's plan for us. There are also hymns incorporated into primer, while there are not hymns incorporated into preschool. You only learn 3 hymns for the year in primer. That's also something that's going to be more or less doable depending on the verbal skills and verbal readiness of your child. If your child is ready to sing Holy, 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 if your child is ready to sing the doxology, they're going to be fine. You have 12 weeks to learn the doxology. But for a younger child, they might not be as verbally ready for that. One more subject area that I wanted to speak to was kind of science. Now, of course, science is very gentle and super fun in these early years of education and homeschool. In the preschool program, I would say the main connection to science is the all about me statements. And it's kind of science and social studies is how it would be categorized if you were thinking of it as subjects. It begins as social studies where do I live, what country, what's my state, what's my address, those kind of basic ideas that kids typically learn around this age, working on memorizing those. And then you start moving into anatomy, basic human anatomy, you know. Where's your brain? What does your brain do on a preschool level? Where's your heart? What does your heart do on a preschool level? Your skin, your muscles, your bones. Building vocabulary, building the basic ideas of how your body works. So we have really enjoyed that as the science element of preschool. Now for Gentle and Classical Primer, it does not itself include science, but you are suggested and recommended that if you want to include science, go ahead and get the Gentle and Classical Nature program. They have volumes 1 or 2. I've used both of those and I have videos on both of those that I can link down below. And those give you an opportunity to do themed science where you're learning about temperate climates, different types of animals, different types of life cycles within nature, or if you do volume 2, where you're learning basic marine biology, learning about different types of creatures, different types of natural cycles in the ocean. And so you can kind of choose maybe what science fits your children and maybe your climate the best. We've done both, we enjoyed both, but we actually liked the ocean one better because we live right next to the ocean and right next to the beach, 5 minutes drive away, so it's easy to engage with that. I hope that this video really helped give you a good picture on kind of the holistic idea of where to place your child in Gentle and Classical Preschool versus Primer, and that it's not just about ABCs 1, 2, 3s, although don't ignore that as a factor, but really pay attention to their comprehension skills, their attention skills, their verbal skills to know how ready they are to engage with the primer material. We have enjoyed both of these programs so much. If you have any questions, leave them for me down below. And if you're interested in seeing more on their website and in their shop, click on my affiliate link in the description. I appreciate it, and I will be seeing you later. Bye.